Hey guys, this is Chubs back again with another Doom Builder tutorial, and today I'm going to be showing you all how to create PolyObjects. A PolyObject is basically like a series of connected lines that can move together in unison. So what you can do with these is you can create really cool effects like sliding doors, rotating walls, you can do Wolfenstein 3D style push walls, you can do all sorts of things. So before we start to create these things, let's go into our map here and let's just take a look at what I've set up for us. So we have a player start, and the player is facing this sort of opening in the wall. It's like a gap, and this leads into a larger room, and then if you keep pushing forwards you get to this sort of open doorway here with door track textures on each side. So what I want us to do is I want us to have a poly object that fills up this gap completely, and I also want us to have a poly object that fills up this doorway, and this is eventually going to become a sliding door. Let's go back to this gap though and let's talk about it a little bit more. This is going to be the first poly object that we're going to be working with. So what I want us to do, like I said, I want us to create a poly object that totally fills up this gap. I also want this poly object to look just like the wall, and that way it's going to be almost like a fake wall, and then we're going to have a switch somewhere inside this room, and when the player flips that switch, the poly object or the fake wall is going to do a 360-degree rotation, and that way it allows the player to pass through and enter this next room. So first let's go ahead and let's create this poly object. So the first step when you're creating a poly object is you want to create a large dummy sector or dummy area. Let's go ahead and do that. So let's go out here to the left and let's draw out a large rectangular area. And you want this area to be large enough to hold the lines that make up the poly object. Remember that I said a poly object is a series of connected lines that move together. So you want to have a fairly large dummy sector. You don't want to do something like this, like in the case of a 3D floor. You want it to be something fairly large. So since we want to fill up this gap, first let's measure this gap. So in line mode I'm going to measure it here. I'm going to hold down right click, take a quick look. So you can see it's 192 from left to right, and it is 32 from top to bottom. So those will be the dimensions that we're going to draw. So let's go over to our dummy sector, press L to make sure that we're in line mode, and then let's draw lines with those dimensions. So let's go across 192, down 32, and then let's close this off. Let's make this a closed shape, just like that. So we've basically created a square sector, and this sector has the same dimensions as the gap that we want to fill up. Now what we want to do is we want to void this sector out. We actually don't want this to be a sector. So let's press S to enter sector mode, highlight the sector that you've made, and press the delete key, and that will, as you can see, void it out. And even though we've deleted the sector, we still have the lines here, and this is the important part. We want the lines, but we don't want the sector. Next, what you want to do is go into visual mode, travel over to your dummy sector here, and you want to give these lines the correct textures, because a poly object, remember, is a series of lines, and these are the lines that it will consist of. Basically the textures that you give this poly object here will be the same textures that you see when you play the game and actually go into the map. So since I want this poly object to look like a fake wall, I'm going to give it the same starting 2 textures. So let's just look at these textures here, starting 2. Let's copy and then let's paste, and that way it fills all of these untextured lines with the starting 2 wall texture. So we're done with that part. Now we're going to get into the actual PolyObject stuff, and there are basically like 3 things you need to do, or 3 steps you need to take to make a PolyObject a PolyObject. The first step is you need to go over to your dummy sector here, and then go to your series of lines, and you need to right click on one of these lines, just one. It can be any of the lines. Let's do the far right line here, and then you want to give it an action of PolyObjects start line. Click OK, and for now we're going to leave all of these parameters the same. PolyObject number, this is important. Since we've not made any other PolyObjects, we're going to keep this at 0. Whenever we make a second PolyObject, we're going to change this to 1, and so on and so forth. For now though, let's keep it at 0. So that is step 1. Step 2 is you want to create a PolyObject anchor, and this is a thing. So press T to go into thing mode, right click to place a thing, and whenever you start, you're not going to be in this category. You're probably going to be up in the player starts category. So what you want to do is go down to the Chubzdoomer category, look for PolyObject anchor, and click OK. Next, you want to position this anchor basically like in relation to where you want the PolyObject to be. Now this is sort of difficult to explain. I'm going to cover this better here as we go. For now, what we're going to do is we're going to place it in directly in the center of our group of lines. So see how I've put it directly in the middle here? It's like it's surrounded by our lines. It's perfectly in the center. We're going to do that for now. Another very important thing is whenever you place this, the angle that you have is probably going to be something different. I'm not sure what the default is, but what you want to do is make sure that the angle is the same number as the PolyObject number here on your start line. So remember, we didn't have any other PolyObjects, so we left this at 0. So what you want to do, go into thing mode, go back to your anchor, and make sure that angle is also 0. You want this to match your PolyObject number. That's very important. The angle is almost like a tag. This is something that's really strange. It's specific to PolyObjects. It's probably one of the weirdest things when it comes to making maps or editing, because there aren't really many other instances where you use an angle like a tag. So click OK, and that is step 2. Now for the third and final step, go over here to your actual map, and you're going to stay in thing mode, place a new thing, and instead of PolyObject anchor, here you want to do PolyObject start spot. This is going to be where your PolyObject is actually positioned in your map. And again, the angle is important for this as well. Make sure that the angle matches up with the PolyObject number. So if we click OK, notice that we have a red line now that stretches from the PolyObject anchor to the PolyObject start spot. This red line basically tells us that the numbers match up in the angles, and that way, you know, everything is set up correctly. Now if we were to go over here to where start spot and change angle to something else, like if we were to just type in 50 for the angle, click OK, notice we don't have that line anymore. So that's a way to know whether or not it's set up correctly. If you don't see a line, that means the angles don't match up. So let's go back, let's change it to 0, and to recap yet again, angle in the instance of these PolyObject things is referring to the PolyObject number. You can think of the angle as like a tag or like an ID. So everything should be set up correctly. Let's go ahead and let's start the map and let's see how it looks. Alright, so as you could see here, whenever we started the map, we no longer had this gap here. And the reason for that is these lines were basically transported over here to our start spot, and they occupied this area. So it basically creates a physical wall that the player cannot pass through. And the wall can be shot, it can be used, it acts just like a regular wall. So that's sort of what's unique about PolyObjects. Is it's almost like you take lines that are over in a dummy sector and you move them off to some other part of a map. I also want to go back to the concept of the anchor and the start spot. Remember that I said the anchor determines the position of the PolyObject. I want to show you guys what I mean by this. So notice that we put both the start spot and the anchor like right in the middle here. So the anchor is sort of in the middle and the start spot is sort of in the middle. Let's take the start spot and let's move the start spot over to the left. Let's move it right there. Now let's click play and let's see how it looks. So notice that we had a gap that time. The reason for this is basically like the start spot and the anchor, they are tied together. Since our start spot was like offset to the left, but our anchor was in the middle, what this caused was it caused the PolyObject to also sort of be offset to the left. So what you want to do in general is you want to position the start spot and the anchor you basically want to put them in similar positions. So what we could do that would also be valid is we could take the anchor and we could move it to the left, and then we could take the start spot and we could stick it on the left. And now if we play the map, it should look correct. And let's go ahead and do that just to prove it. Alright, so you could see there, that time the gap was gone and it filled up the entire section because the anchor was on the far left and the start spot was also on the far left. Now for this specific wall, since I want this to be a rotating wall that sort of rotates here from the center, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the wall, or I'm sorry, not the wall, but the anchor back in the middle, and I'm also going to put the start spot in the middle. And we're just going to keep it like that, just like we had done it originally. So we've already seen that when we play the map, the gap in the wall is totally filled up by these lines, and so it creates a wall that's in that gap. What we need to do now, though, is we need to actually add some cool rotation. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a switch. So I'm just going to go into sector mode, or not sector mode, but line mode. And I'm going to do a 16 by 64 sector. We're going to raise it up out of the ground, and what we're going to do, we're just going to slap a switch texture on this. I'm going to texture it all the way around with start and 2, and then I'm going to go in the switches category, give it a switch texture, raise it up here so the player can see the switch. Okay, so what we want to do is we're going to go to the switch, pull up its actions in line mode, and under actions we want to go to the PolyObjects category, and here you can see all of the ways that you can interact with PolyObjects. You can rotate them, you can move them, you can have a door that slides just like we're going to do here later. You can make a PolyObject stop, like if it's already moving. You can do all kinds of different things. Here we're going to be rotating, and I think we're going to start. We're just going to do a rotation to the right. That way it sort of spins clockwise. So let's choose that. PolyObject rotate right. Next, what we want to do is we want to make sure the PolyObject number is correct. Remember that we kept it at 0 because we didn't have any other PolyObjects. So we're going to keep it just like that for now. Keep PolyObject number at 0. rotation speed, this is kind of an obvious one. This just determines how fast it spins or rotates. I think we'll just do normal for now. That might be too slow, but we'll just try it out. Now, target angle, this is something that I've struggled with. This basically determines the angle that the rotation goes through. I've had a lot of trouble understanding this. You know, if anybody wants to leave a comment down below further elaborating on this or clearing this up, you know, I'd really be grateful. This is something I've just struggled with. I believe for a 360-degree rotation, what has worked for me is west. But you know, if you choose an angle and it rotates too far or it doesn't rotate enough, then just try another value. For a 360-degree rotation, though, I think west does it, 128. These other arguments are blank, so just leave those alone. And remember, this is a switch, so what we're going to do is we're going to have it the activation be when the player presses use, and we're also going to make this repeatable. And we want it to be repeatable that way, like if the player flips the switch and it rotates and he doesn't pass through it, he can flip the switch again and make it rotate again to give him another opportunity to pass through that wall. So, just to recap what we've done, we have created a switch and we've made it so that when the player flips this switch, it performs the PolyObject rotate right action. The number of the PolyObject is 0, and this is referring to this PolyObject right here. And then we have set the speed to be normal, that's the speed of the rotation, and the target angle is 128, and what that should do is it should result in a full 360-degree rotation. So what it'll do, it'll rotate 360 degrees, or it might be, let's see, it might be 180 degrees. I think it's 360, and then it stops, and then, you know, if you flip the switch again, it'll rotate all the way around again. Anyways, all that crap out of the way, let's go ahead and test the map, and let's see what we got. Alright, so as you can see, whenever we flipped the switch, the PolyObject rotated, and that allowed us to pass through into the next room. Now, I think that rotation speed was a little too slow. I'm going to up it to fast. Let's just test the map one more time, and let's see how much faster that is and how much better that is. There we go. That was much better. So we've got a nice fast rotation, and by having that action, that allows the player to advance into this next area. And this brings us to our next example. So what I want us to do is, before we do this sliding door, I want us to have an obstacle that's blocking this door. This is going to be almost like a big rock or something that's blocking the way. And then we're going to have a switch that the player flips to make the rock slide out of the way. And the rock itself will, of course, be a PolyObject. So now that we've already created a PolyObject, we're going to go through these steps a little bit quicker. First, we want to determine how large the rock is going to be. I'm just going to measure it out here. Let's see. I'm going to make a fairly large one. I'm going to make it square. Let's do 128 by 96, just like we have here. I think that's going to be fine. So 128 by 96. Let's go over here and let's draw some lines out with those dimensions. 128, 96, and remember, go into sector mode, clear out that sector. Let's give it some lines that sort of look like a rock or like some sort of an obstacle. Let's see, rock. We'll just give it these ash wall textures all the way around it. Alright. Remember, we're going to do the 3 steps that I told you about. We're going to start with step 1, which is giving it the PolyObject start line. Here's where we're going to do something a little bit different. Instead of PolyObject number being 0, we're going to change this to 1 because we already have 0 being used here for our spinning wall. So here we're going to change it to 1. Alright, we're done with that. Next we're going to do the anchor. So let's place a brand new PolyObject anchor. Here the angle is going to be 1 to match up with the object. We're going to keep the anchor here in the center just like we did down here. We're going to go over here, and this is the tricky part. We want it to match up to block this passageway, so I'm going to try and line it up just right. This is going to be the start spot, and the angle is still going to be 1 because remember the angle is almost like a tag, so this will be referring to PolyObject 1, which is the one that we just created with the rock texture. And again, you're sort of seeing the red lines that I talked about, and they tell you that you've done the angles right. So you can see since the angles on these are 0 for the spinning wall, they are linked with the red line, and since the angles on these are 1, they are also linked with the red line. So this tells you that you've done the angles correctly and these are now linked. So before we go do anything further, let's just test the map once again and let's see what we have for now. Alright, so as you could see, the spinning wall still did its thing, and then when we moved into this new area here, this doorway was completely blocked by this brand new PolyObject rock wall that we created. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to create a switch. I'm going to put the switch sort of inside the wall this time instead of being stuck up out of the ground. Let's put the switch right here. So I'm going to just go into vertices mode. We're going to place 2 vertices, and that way we create a line. We're going to give this line a switch texture, and we're just going to leave it like this. And let's go into the actions, the line actions. Let's go into the PolyObject category, and this time instead of doing rotate right, we're just going to do move. Alright, so PolyObject number, remember that the big rock obstacle that we made used the number of 1. That's what we're going to use here. Movement speed, I think we'll stick with fast this time since normal was slow for our wall. I think we're just going to try fast. Movement angle, this basically determines what direction it moves in. So remember the rock obstacles here. What I want it to do is scoot over to the left, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to change angle to left just like that. And finally we have the movement distance. This just determines how far it moves. So I'm going to go into line mode. I'm going to go to the PolyObject start spot, and I'm going to measure. Let's say that we want it to move over 200. Let's do 208. That looks like a pretty far distance. And let's delete this leftover vertex. So let's see, what was that again? 208? Yep. Pretty bad when I forget that easily. Okay, so let's go back to our line here for the switch. Movement distance 208. And again, since this is a switch, we're going to do player presses use, but this will not be a repeatable action because what we want to happen, what we want to have happen is we want it to be when the switch is flipped, the obstacle moves, and then that's it. We don't want the player to flip the switch again and move it again because it's not going to be needed. We're not going to be needing it to move again. It's only going to need to move once. So let's do a quick recap. We have created the rock obstacle. We added a switch, and the switch's action is PolyObject move, and what it says is it's going to move this rock to the left. The speed is going to be fast, and the distance it's going to move to the left is going to be 208 units. Alright, so let's test the map and let's see what we have now. Okay, so it worked out just like we'd hoped. One thing I did notice though, I think that was a little too fast, so we're going to do the opposite here. Instead of making it faster, we're going to go to the speed and we're going to make it slower. Let's do normal. I want it to seem like it's like a big boulder moving out of the way. I want it to be somewhat slow. So let's change it to that. Let's do a quick test one more time just to verify that it's okay. Alright, I think that'll suffice for now. I think that was maybe a little too slow, but you know what? We're just going to stick with it. So we've made the spinning wall. We've made the rock obstacle that moves. And so now we just have one last step, and that is to create a sliding door that occupies this space. So since we've done two poly objects, this a series of steps here should be even quicker. So let's go ahead and let's make this door really fast. So let's measure out the door. So these are the door track textures. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go in line mode here. I'm going to measure it. It's going to be 128 across and 16 down. So let's draw that out here in our dummy sector. 128, 16. Sector mode, delete. Now this is a pretty important part here. We want to give the front and the back a door texture. We'll just texture it just like that. Actually, you know, I don't like the way it looks like it's in the ground. So let's go to both sides and let's do lower unpegged. There we go. So you can see that makes it look like it's correct at the bottom. And on the sides of the door, let's just do door track. Just like that. So that looks pretty good. So now that we've got the textures in place, we're going to follow those three steps I told you about. We're going to do PolyObject start line right here. So let's go to the line actions, PolyObject start line. The number for this one is going to be 2 because remember we've already used 0 and 1. So 2 is going to be this one. Click OK. Next we're going to do the anchor. For this one I think we're going to have the anchor on the far left side just to try that out. So let's place the anchor thing. Angle is going to be 2 because remember the angle corresponds with the PolyObject number. And finally the start spot, we're going to put it over here on the left because remember this anchor was over on the left here, so we're going to do the left here as well. So place the start spot thing, make sure the angle is 2 so that it matches up, and you can see the red line connecting it. So again, let's just do a quick test and let's look at what we have for now. Alright, so we have the spinning wall, the sliding rock, and we have the door that is now occupying this space. So what we want to do is relatively simple. We want to make it so that when the player presses use on the door, it slides open, it waits, and then it slides back. So you might be wondering, well, how would you do that since it's not going to be involving a switch? Well, remember that these anchors and these start spots are basically taking these series of lines here and they are moving them over. So it's almost like we're grabbing these lines and we're just dragging them over just like this. And so what you can do is you can go to these lines like on the sides of the lines that the player will activate with these door textures. You can select them both. I'm just going to do this here in visual mode. Right click to pull up the actions, and you can give the actions right here. So to make it clear again, we are giving the actions not to some switch out here, but to the lines themselves. So we're going to do the sides of the lines with the door textures. So let's select them both, pull up their properties, go into the actions, and then PolyObjects. And here we're going to do door slide. So PolyObject number, remember for this one it's going to be 2. Speed, we'll just leave it at fast. Movement angle, this is which direction the door is going to slide in. We want it to slide over to the left, so we're going to choose left. Distance, let's see, I think we're going to have to measure that. Let's take a quick look here. Let's see. What we want to do is we want it to slide the same, basically like the same length of the door. So the length of the door is 128, as you can see there. So let's go back to the actions on both sides here. Let's change the movement distance to 128. That way the door slides all the way open. There's not like a lip that's left or anything. And finally, the delay, this just determines how long it stays open before it slides back the other way. I think I'm going to do 5 seconds. I think that'll be just about right. And for the action, we want it to be when player presses use, and we do want it to be repeatable. That way when it opens and it closes, the player can walk up and open it again. So I think we have completed all the steps. Let's go ahead and let's test the map just to make sure we didn't leave anything out and to make sure that it works correctly. Alright, so we have completed all of the PolyObjects. You can see that the door worked just like it was supposed to. We could open it from either side and it slid open, and then after a few seconds, 5 seconds to be exact, it closed. In fact, I think that delay was a little bit long. I think the default was 3 seconds. Let's go ahead and let's change it back. I'm just going to make it 3 seconds. That way it won't stay open as long. And you know, really we have completed everything. But there is one important part that I wanted to teach you guys about, and that is how to give PolyObjects sounds. You know, because you don't want to have a door that's silent when you open it, because that just doesn't seem right. So we're going to be working with Slade for this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep Doom Builder open, but I'm just going to close this WAD. That way when I open the WAD in Slade, it doesn't cause any errors. So I'm going to do File and then Close Map. And so GZ Doom Builder is still going to be open, but we're going to come back to it. So let's open up Slade, and let's open up our map right here. And what I've done is I have extracted some sounds from the original Doom. I've extracted the original door open sound, and I've also extracted sounds for lifts, like when a lift lowers and then hits. And I've also extracted the sound for the floor moving, like when a floor lowers or raises. So I have those in a folder here, I think. And these are the original sounds, but what I've done is I've renamed them. That way there won't be any conflicts. And I've also renamed them to be a little easier to read. So you can see this is pretty clearly a door close and then door open. This is floor move. And this is lift start and then lift stop. What we're going to do, we're going to use door close and door open for the sliding door. We're going to use floor move for the big rock. So as the rock slides, we're going to have it make the floor move sound. And we're going to use the lift start and lift stop sound for the rotating wall. What I'm going to do with it is when the wall starts to rotate, we're going to do the lift start sound, and then like when it stops the rotation, we're going to do lift stop. So I thought I would just elaborate on that a little bit before we get into it. Since we have these sounds here though, we're going to drag them in. Before I do that, I do want to let you guys know I'm going to put a link to these sounds in the description. That way you guys don't have to go digging in your Doom WAD to pull them out yourself. I'm going to create like a zip folder with these sounds in them. That way you can follow along easier and download them. So look in the description and you'll see a link for those sounds there. Anyways, back to what we were doing. With all of these sounds selected, we're going to drag them into our WAD here in Slade. And you can see it already placed them at the very top. If they aren't at the very top, select them all and then keep clicking this up arrow until all of the sounds are above your map files. Next, what you want to do is you want to create a sound info entry here in in Slade. So go up here to this piece of paper with like an E on it, and when you hover over it, it'll say new entry. Click it, and for the name of this, type SND info, sound info, and click OK. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to click and select this, and I'm going to move it to the top, and then I'm going to click this button here that says view as text. And what we're basically going to do here is we're just going to type the names of these sounds, and we're going to type them twice. It's going to be one, basically each sound is going to have its own line. You'll see what I'm talking about here. So we're going to start with door close and door open. So I'm going to type DR close. I'm going to type it just as it appears here. And then I'm going to tab over and I'm going to type it once again. You have to type it twice like that. What we're doing is we're basically defining the names of these sounds, and that way when we refer to them here in another entry that we're going to create later, it'll know what we're talking about. It's sort of hard to explain, but this is a step that you have to do. So press enter. Let's do door open this time. DR open, tab, DR open. Go down. The next one's going to be floor move. So FLR move, tab, FLR move. Go down a line. Lift start. So FLT start, tab, FLT start, and you can see we sort of knocked them out of alignment. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to do it anyways. I'm just going to tab them over, that way they're nice and lined up. And the last sound here is going to be lift stop, FLT stop, tab over, FLT stop. And that's all you have to do for this entry. Again, you're just typing the names of the sounds twice, and you just have like one sound on each line, just like that. So you can save it. Let's see, I'm not sure which of these save icons. I think it's this icon. Yes, that saved it all. There are several different ways you can save. This regular save icon here is the one that you want to click. You can also hold Control and press S. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to create a sound sequence file. So once again, go up to this piece of paper with the E on it, click it, and instead of typing sound info, we're going to type SND SEQ, sound sequence. Click OK, and I'm going to move it to the top as well. And I'm also going to click view as text, because this is also going to be like a text file. Now this is where it gets a little bit complex. And so what we're going to do is we're going to turn to the ZDoom wiki, which is always like the most useful resource ever when it comes to ZDoom mapping and editing. So let's search. Let's go up here to the search bar and let's type SND SEQ. And this pulls up an entire page that talks about what that is. And as you can see here, this is used to create sequences of sounds for doors, platforms, or scripts. This is also for, in our case, PolyObjects. And whenever you create a sound sequence for a PolyObject, what you're going to do is you're basically going to treat it like a door. And you're going to see what I'm talking about here in just a little bit. Now if you scroll down, they give you some examples here, so you can use these. These are really helpful. And here's one that we're really going to take a close look at. So let's copy these lines. Let's go back into Slade and let's paste them here. And let's take a look, and I'm going to break down these lines here. So the first line here, you can see it starts with a colon. You want to keep this here. After the colon is the name of the sequence. You can name this whatever you want. So for our specific map here, let's just call this rotating wall. This is going to be referring to that wall that rotates. Next, you have the number of the sequence. And remember that I said a PolyObject is treated like a door in a sound sequence. So we're going to leave this as door, and we're going to also leave the number as 0. Now the number basically refers to the number of the sound sequence, and as we go down and we add more of these sequences, we're going to number them accordingly. You're also going to see that. Now these are just lines that play sounds, and then you have a line here at the very end that's called end, and this basically just signifies the end of this specific sequence. Now what I want us to do here is let's see, we're going to change things up a little bit, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and type this out, and then I'm going to come back and explain what I've just done. So lift start, lift stop. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've done here. So we have named this sound sequence rotating wall. This is going to be sound sequence 0, and even though it says door, this also refers to PolyObjects. And in fact, if we go back to the ZDoom wiki, if you go up to door here, you can see that it says a door in this context is any sector movement by a door type or a PolyObject. So remember that a door can be like an actual door, or it can be a PolyObject. So even if the PolyObject is not actually a door, you're still going to refer to it as a door in the sound sequence. So I just wanted to make that clear. Let's go back to Slade. Again, we've called it door, or we've said that it's a door sound sequence, and we've given it a sound sequence number of 0. And what we have said here is when this sound sequence first it's going to play the lift start sound, and then whenever the sequence ends, we want it to play the lift stop sound. So in our specific example, what we're going to have here is whenever the wall begins to rotate, it's first going to play the lift start sound, and then when it finishes rotating and that sound sequence stops, it's going to play the lift stop sound. So that's what play and stop sound means. Play is basically like the sound that plays. Stop sound is the sound that plays whenever the sequence is over. So that part is done. Next, let's make a sound sequence for the rock that moves. So let's type a colon, and let's just call this moving rock. Why not? I mean, we can name it anything. Next, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to copy these lines from here, just like so. Now remember, this is the number of the sound sequence. We don't want to use the same number twice, so let's call this 1. We also don't want a stop sound. Instead, what we want to have for the rock is we want to have the floor move sound, and we want it to play over and over again until the sound sequence is over. So if we go to the ZDoom wiki and we look at like these different types here, you can see that play repeat plays a sound repeatedly in an endless loop. That is what we want. We want this sound to play over and over and over again until the movement has stopped, or until the sound sequence is over. So back in Slade, instead of having just play, we're going to say play repeat. And we don't want the sound to be lift start. Instead, we want it to be floor move. So let's type that out, FLR move, and we're done with that. Finally, this is the part that's a little more complicated. This is going to be for our door. What we want to do is, let's go back to the ZDoom wiki. They have a great section here about doors, and let's pretty much copy their example. So you can see that when you have a door, you have 4 possible states. You have the door opening, the door closing, and then you have a fast open and a fast close. Well, if you don't want separate sounds like for opening fast or like opening at a normal speed, what you can do is, as you can see here, you can have the open and close sounds be the same regardless of the speed. And that's what we're going to do. You know, we're not going to have a fast open sound or a fast close sound. It's not going to matter what speed the door opens at. We're just going to keep the sound the same. So let's copy what they have here, go back into Slade, and let's paste it. I'm going to name this differently. I'm going to call this sliding door. I'm also going to I don't like the way door is uppercase here. It doesn't matter, but door is lowercase in the examples above, so we're going to make this lowercase, and we're also going to change the number of this to 2 because we already have 0 and 1. So let's use 2. This is an unused number. Now we're going to need to come back to these names. Before we do that though, let's go ahead and create two more sequences. The two sequences we're going to make here are for the sliding door opening and closing. So let's start one here. Remember, you start it with a colon. Let's say sliding door open. Let's go ahead and type end. We're going to come back to this, and then let's do sliding door close end. Now what we need to do is between the end we need to tell it what sound to play. We're going to try this and hopefully this will work. I'm trying to think which play we would need. Let's see here. Okay, I think I know what we're going to do. Yeah, so I'm going to go by what they have here. What we're going to do, we're going to tell it to play a sound, and we're also going to add this no stop cutoff sound. And I think the way this works is if you place the line no stop cutoff, what that means is that even if the movement stops, the sound will still play all the way through. And that way, like when the door opens, if the door opening sound is still playing, even when it fully opens, it won't cut it off abruptly. It'll still play the sound all the way through. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these two lines, and I'm going to paste them in between. And we're going to do this for the sliding door close as well. Just paste it right in between. And then all we have to do is change the name of the sound to the ones that we want. So play, we're going to do door open, because remember this sequence is sliding door open. And for sliding door close, we're going to do play DR close to match up with their sounds. You might also be wondering, why don't I have, like, see how we have door 0 and door 1 here? You might be wondering, well, why don't I have that here for door open and door close? The reason for that is door open and door close are going to be encompassed here in this entire sliding door section with these brackets. So speaking of that, let's go ahead and change these names to match up with the new ones that we added. So instead of my door open, it's going to be sliding door open. And we're going to do it here for this as well. And then instead of my door close, it's going to be sliding door close. Just like so. And I think that's covered all of it. So basically whenever this sequence happens, regardless of the speed that the door opens, it's going to call the sliding door open sequence, in which case it plays the door open sound and it makes sure that the sound never gets cut off. And when the door closes, regardless what speed it closes at, it's going to play the sliding door close sequence. So I know this is a little complex, and believe me when I say that this is not my specialty. I've never been great at WAD editing or sound info or sound sequence. This is something I just learned recently. But if you're ever confused and you need to learn more, consult the ZDoom wiki, and it'll tell you a lot and explain a lot. And check out these examples that they've given you here in the gray. They've commented them, and it helped me a lot when it came to learning how sound sequence works and what these different commands do. But now that we've got all that stuff out of the way, let's save our WAD. So I'm going to hold Control and press S, say yes to that, and it should be saved. Let's exit out, and I was thinking about closing Slade just in case we have an error, though. I'm going to leave it open. Let's go back over to GZDoom Builder. Let's reopen our map. And here we are. So what we need to do is we need to specify the sound sequences. So go to your start lines for each of your PolyObjects, pull up its properties, and all you have to do is type the name of the sound sequence under sound number. Now remember that we started with 0, and I'm pretty sure 0 corresponded to the rotating wall, so this one's already correct. We don't have to worry about that. Let's go up here. This one, if you remember, is our rock wall. So we're going to pull up its start line. Its sound number will be 1. Click OK. And then for the door, go to the PolyObject start line and change its sound number to 2. And hopefully we have not made any mistakes. It's very possible that I did make a mistake, because I'm not great when it comes to sound info and sound sequence, but hopefully all is well, and hopefully our sounds will play correctly. So let's save the map, let's test it, and let's hope for the best. Alright, so thankfully everything worked out correctly. The sounds played correctly, the PolyObjects moved correctly, and it worked great. So this has been probably one of the most long-winded Doom tutorials I've ever done, but I hope I haven't lost you guys or confused you. This has been a tough one to do. PolyObjects have never been something I've been great at, but you know, Again, I hope I've taught you guys something. If you have any questions about them, feel free to ask in the comments. If you have any tips, feel free to leave them below in the comments. There are also some more advanced things you can do with PolyObjects, like you can have PolyObjects that are transparent. You can have more complex shapes, but to do a shape that's more complex than like a basic square, you have to use different methods. I meant to point that out earlier. And I didn't want to get that advanced in this tutorial. I just wanted to keep it relatively simple. But I think that really covers all the basics, and I really wanted to show you guys how to get those sound effects in there, because that's pretty important. You don't want a silent door or anything like that, because it just seems wrong. You don't want anything to not have some sort of a sound effect associated with it. But I appreciate all of you guys watching. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. And this is Chubb signing out.